Hello, everyone. Well, I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been guided and inspired to do thanks to my energetic connection with Kata Judah being our beautiful sacred masculine side in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine side. And this is actually number 77 of 100 that I did commit to doing. So after today, another 23, and we'll see what happens after that. What I'm here to do is to give a platform to men to share their journey into the heart, their highs, lows, tools, practices, insights, or wisdom. What things have they picked up along the way that they can now share with the other men walking this path? And of course, us women who are walking right there by their side. Today's guest is a man from America, and his name is Joe Keich. And Joe is an intimacy and relationship coach and deals very much with men and their emotions. So, really excited to be getting into this today with Joe and really exploring and opening up this area of the heart. So, thank you for being here and enjoy. Hello, Joe Keich. Welcome to Heart Warriors. How are you today?
Hi. I'm great. I'm actually glad to be here, especially after that little intro you just gave me on what we're looking forward to doing. And got a real good sense of that you're doing some pretty cool stuff out there. So doing great. Glad to
Oh,
be here.
thank you. Where about in the States are you?
I live in Fort Worth, Texas, which is just stone's throw away from Dallas. Most people know Dallas. Fewer people know of Fort Worth, and usually it's like if you're familiar with the area or you've been through the airport, which is one of the biggest in the United States, it's initials DFW, so the Dallas Fort Worth.
Right. Oh, good to know. Thank you. All right,
Mhm.
let's find out a little bit about you, Joe. How would you describe the man you are inside when you drop all your labels of relation and intimacy coach and, father, husband, whatever else, other labels you have in the world? Who's the man inside?
Great question. So the man inside is a man who is very committed to being an example to those he connects with, those who see him, those who experience him as the best role model that he can be for other men, for children, for the relationships that I'm developing. Pretty much everything in my life is central to that theme.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome because we need so many of those role models in the world at the moment as our men are rising and healing. So let's go back to little Joe. What was his major challenge growing up?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I was just thinking about some of the things that I'd gone through in my childhood for a video that I did on my Facebook group had me going back into my childhood. I was actually a really sensitive boy in a lot of different regards. So that was both emotionally from pain and suffering that I'd experienced, but it was also just I was just my nervous system, the way my nervous system responded to things, especially in my childhood. It was like everything was intense. My emotional experience was intense. The sensations, everything about my experience was really intense. And I had to go through different phases of understanding that my unique experience was kind of, you could categorize that as sort of, HSP, the highly sensitive person, or whatever. But it forced me to deepen my understanding of other people because I had to really dig into myself to understand what was going on. Why was my experience so unique? Why is it that I experienced things so intensely, but not just within myself, but also in other people's emotional reactions or responses? And being a boy, being a boy that's sensitive doesn't really work well in very highly masculinized cultures. You're supposed to not feel things. You're supposed to not have emotions. You're supposed to not care, because that's the way adults, as a boy, that's the way that adults teach you to see yourself in relationship to the rest of the world. So not only was I highly just nervous system reactive, emotionally reactive because of the traumas that I experienced, but I was also somebody that wanted to see change in a world that doesn't really permit change to happen very easily. So a boy that's this sensitive that also wants the world to experience love is like, well, I'm not supposed to be sensitive. I have to become what is the thing that I'm not experiencing because it's not out there, which means love, but I'm not supposed to be loving because I'm a boy. So I have to learn how to be in a world that resists that reality while still retaining the part of me that says I'm not going to not become love. I'm not going to not do that. Right. So my struggle and my challenge came from that intense dichotomy of, okay, well, I have to become also simultaneously this man that can be relatable to other men that have been taught and identify as tough man, a real strong, assertive man, an emotionless man. So I did the wrestling and I did the football, and I really taught myself how to succeed in life. And yet I carry with me this part of myself that I will never let go of, and that is my ability to attune hypersensitively to other people as a result of what I've lived through.
Oh, this is fascinating, Joe. And I know we have talked on Heart Warriors about sensitivity a bit, so I'm really keen for you to expand in this. How did you work through that as a boy? You said your nervous system was, so sensitive with people's reactions and, what you were seeing around you. How did you deal with that as a young child?
Got some great questions. Really great questions. How did I deal with that as a child? Mostly, I just embraced that it was bound to happen, whether or not I wanted it to. Really, I see it like this. And at the time, it was painful. And at the time, I didn't really have a skill set that allowed me to adapt to that sort of experience well. Like it wasn't like I didn't have, my stepfather was alcoholic, abusive. My own father was absent most of my life. My older brother was, I just had to fight him all the time, and he was really mean most of the time. And so all of the role models that I had of men in my life hadn't really taught me how to deal with my own emotions. They hadn't taught me how to deal with other people's emotions and how they respond and react to me. So I didn't have a skill set on how to deal with that stuff. I basically went through life going like, this really fucking hurts, and ow, I wish people weren't so mean, and I wish that all of these other things. As I'm suffering through this, I'm observing other people who happen to have the skill sets that I need, and I'm collecting bit by bit these skill sets, going like, well, that's really neat. How did they do that? And it's like, oh, well, their parents were treating them in a more healthy way. Well, what is that healthy way? Okay, that's cool. Let me see if I can be around these sort of people so I can pick up these qualities, characteristics, and traits. And as a child, there wasn't really an option. Like I wasn't like, I'm just trying to understand life. And so it's kind of like, I think of it like it's sort of like I just got an image of like, me being in a bumper card. If you've ever done the bumper cars thing, it's pretty much the game is how many people you can slam into and how hard you can do it, It's like that's all that's happening. Bump, 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 you know. Um, so it wasn't really something that I learned how to deal with quickly, efficiently, or well throughout most of my childhood. Wasn't until like in my teens, late teens and 20s that it really I started to get some substantial skill set.
Oh, this is so good. Okay, and we'll get into what those skill sets were, but I'd like you to talk to parents of sensitive children now, please, Joe. What advice have you got them to be able to help their children?
What advice? Is that what you said?
Yeah, like how, you said you didn't get much from your role models around you, to help you navigate this sensitivity. And I know a lot of parents recognize their own children as being sensitive. How are they able to help their children through this sensitivity to, bring out the best of them?
Yeah. So uh I'm chuckling because I was just thinking about how much of a struggle my mom went with me, in many respects, because I not only was a boy with testosterone, but I was also a sensitive boy and with intense responses. So I honestly, I think it really comes down to two things. One main thing, but one additional thing that sort of extends from that. As a parent, you are not only a role model. I mean, if we take it really to the full extent to what that really means, what a role model means as a parent, it means that everything you do, you are teaching them everything. It's not just like, a lot of parents want to say, well, you're my kid, so you got to do what I say. And sure, that's one way of approaching it, but the reality is that all of us know that we picked up on our parents' habits as adults. And some of them we're frustrated about. Some of them were irritated. I wish I didn't. I always told myself I wasn't going to do that thing, and here I am doing that thing, right? You don't become what your parent tells you to become, or not become what your parent doesn't tells you not to become. You become everything that your parent is. So first and foremost, are you communicating your tone of voice, your behavior, how you carry yourself, how you engage with life? Are you doing all of the things that you want your child to become? Are you? Because if not, you should probably look at that, really. And that can make a lot of parents uncomfortable because it means you really got to dig into yourself to be the best example you can to that child. That's how I see it. And I see it as absolutely critical. And I see that as the primary reason that we have an abundance of just dysfunctional kids throughout the world. It's how they're being parented. But the other piece I see as sort of an extension of this is, well, how well and effectively, as a result of how well you begin to understand yourself, are you connecting with that child where he is? For me, that would be a little bit more challenging because most people don't experience as intense emotional responses as I did. So it's kind of hard to relate to. But that doesn't mean you can't put yourself into that child's shoes, right? You were a kid. You were a kid and you had parents, and there was a time where you were looking up to your parents going like, why doesn't my dad get it? Right? Like, like why isn't everybody just like being nice all the time? I'm a kid, so if you were to really kind of draw yourself back into the roots of who you were as a child, and you were able to sit yourself into your childhood roots, you can look at the world through a child's eyes. So that child, if I was a child and the entire world around me was really freaking intense, how would I feel? how would I want to be treated? That's how I see it.
Yeah, great insights there. Thank you, Joe. So let's continue on your journey as a going into your teens and early adulthood. What were the main tools and strategies you learned to navigate this sensitivity?
Tools and strategy in my teens and 20s. Truthfully, the tools and strategies I had during my teens and 20s were the occasional self-help book and trial and error.
What was this?
So
I'm sorry.
trial and error, so like learn from your mistakes, right? So especially dating women, that was a huge learning lesson for me. So falling in love and wanting and desiring a woman and going through that whole process of um, um, courting or learning how to court, or what courting even means, and dating and sex and all that, that teaches you a lot about how you're showing up and how to adjust yourself. So teens and 20s were more like a phase of becoming than they were a phase of really truly trying to understand myself. They were, it was like, as I was getting into my teens, my late teens, and then into my 20s, I was going through like kind of a transition of, now I no longer have to be what my parents say I'm supposed to be, because I'm not living under the roof, and I'm becoming who I wanted to be before they required me to be who they wanted me to be. And now that means what? Now I have to discover what that even means. But in addition to that, I was still carrying with me this desire to be, my best way of describing it is be love, right? And it's kind of a generic way of saying it, but really it's what it is, right? So how do you be love, right? So in my mind, this isn't what I was asking myself, but a part of me was wanting, without knowing, putting it into those sorts of words, that's what I wanted, right? So late teens, I didn't really understand that there was a process of becoming that. I just knew that there was a process of looking for it and moving toward it. And during that time, I began to discover, okay, well, people, there are books out there that can teach you how to be a better person, right? So self-development, personal development, and that sort of thing. Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy. And when I was 19, I think I picked up 2 books that began to really shift my mindset and my belief system and really start to propel me into a new direction of self-discovery. And those 2 books were The Prophet by Khalil Gibran and The Tao Te Ching. Both really, really, if you let them change you, they will absolutely change you in a tremendously beneficial way. Because what they'll do is bit by bit, they'll break down your identity of who you are in relation to the world as you've been taught to see yourself, because they'll give you ways of looking at things from completely different perspectives that free you more to yourself and more to just who you are at your core, at your essence, right? I mean, it may take some time to let those things work in, because it's not going to fully set in immediately, but it will over time. So those 2 books, and then other books, I would consume them, I'd read them, I'd digest them, and I'd do my best to apply them. I didn't go too deeply into the personal development books at the time, but did take some from Tony Robbins, did take some from people like Brian Tracy, and absolutely finished those 2 books. And those were hugely transformative to me, because they initiated a new way of relating to myself and to the world around me, and therefore I was just on a new path. But during that time, it was trial and error for the most part.
Yeah, Thank you for that. Yeah, great books there. Okay, so what was your rock bottom moment as an adult?
I've had two really big rock bottom moments. Um, but I would say the one that I tend to go back to that was among the most, that was probably more meaningful to me, and probably a bigger catalyst as well, was my when I was in my mid 20s. I fell in love with a woman who had two kids, a boy and a girl, and absolutely loved and adored those children, loved being a father figure to them. But I was not in a state of mind, um, or in I didn't have financial stability. Um, I didn't have this framework that taught me how to be a good partner, be a good father, and create that balance while caring for an entire family, and simultaneously being open and willing to look at the parts of myself that I will absolutely be forced to see in the presence of a woman that absolutely loves me, and children who adore me. I wasn't prepared for it, but I was absolutely head over heels in love with all of them. And so what ultimately happened was I just, in a way, mindlessly went through this relationship because I didn't really understand how to do it well, until I got to the point where I realized I can't do it at all. Like, I 2.5 years through this relationship, and I'm trying to sustain it, I'm trying to make it work, and I can't. And I had to learn how to just simply own that, despite the fact that my heart is so deeply invested in somebody and feels so much satisfaction and fulfillment in connecting with these individuals, I have to admit to myself that I can't do this, and I've got to learn some things. And so there are a lot of things that I had to give up in that, a dream, a vision that I had for us and them, and for myself and who I wanted to be for them, that I just couldn't do. Um, and that was, it was a huge catalyst for me, huge.
Okay, that must have been such a difficult decision to make. So it's one thing when we've got a dream and we change it and it doesn't really affect anyone around us. But this affected your partner and her children. What do you say to men who are in a similar situation where when changing their dream is going to have a huge impact on the people around them? What advice can you give to those men?
You're saying specifically for their dream and them, or you're saying just in general?
I mean, like, as you said, you realized that the situation you were in wasn't the one that you needed to be in, wanted to be in, so you left, right? Is that, did I
And
understand?
I would call it less leaving, more like we both just gradually moved away from each other. And despite the fact that we both felt that draw, we just went separate ways. So in a way, leaving, I guess.
But there's a lot of men who at the moment are going through huge changes, whether it's, realizing that the material empire they've built up maybe isn't fulfilling them within, and they're making huge changes in their lives that are going to affect their family, or, they may be splitting up in relationships. What I'm trying to get at is men that are struggling with commitment to relationships they're in, or committing to themselves and what they need to do to evolve as a man.
So what advice would I give them as they're on that journey?
Yeah, as they're struggling to, find peace with it all.
Mm. Be willing to be vulnerable with your partner. Be willing to be vulnerable with your children. Because vulnerability, what we've been taught as men is that vulnerability is not allowed. It's not allowed. That is the man's war zone. And that is why men have so much difficulty being emotionally exposed. That's why men tend to, when they're in relationship, when they hit that moment or those moments where a woman is asking more of them and he's getting irritated, frustrated, even angry. And the question at that moment is, it's not about whether or not you can give her what she wants. She's not asking you, and I mean this, I'm saying this generally, so men, if you're listening, this is a general statement here, so follow me, but women, when they're responding to you like that, asking for more of you, it's not what your mind is perceiving, that she wants something that you simply can't give because it's some sort of excess that her, feminine nature wants, that is outrageous. It's your presence. It's the availability of your presence. And you only get there through being vulnerable with her. You only get there through allowing yourself to be exposed. And once you allow yourself to move through that perception that there's something that's she's asking too much of you for, which isn't the reality, it's just you're resistant and you're fighting it. When you can let go into that vulnerability, you're going to find that you're satisfying her in ways that you didn't realize you could. And it's going to be substantially more valuable to her than anything else you could do, because she feels you present, because in those moments she's struggling, the anxiety, the frustration that she's experiencing is as a result of your lack of presence, that you are holding back because your emotions are not here, that you are resisting because you've been taught that vulnerability is dangerous, period. So what that's also going to teach you is, if you begin to soften into that reality, and I get that it's challenging. It really is super challenging and scary when you're there. But that's not only going to teach you how to be more available for your partner and your children as you need to, but it's also going to teach you how to be more connected with your family in ways that you didn't know you weren't being before, because men also have dysfunctional relationships with their families, tend to be. Finally, and I'll add this little piece here, when you can do that, you can also create connections with other people that create more healthy relationships that benefit you in the long run. Because then you get to develop those healthy relationships with men who've been in your life for a long time, but have only experienced you in the limited degree that you've allowed your emotions to be expressed. You move beyond that. And so healthy relationships are fundamental, foundational to living free of your psychological suffering and burdens. It's fundamental to it.
Yes, so good. Let's expand on healthy relationships, Joe. And if I may, I'll read something that you said to me in a voice message that I thought was profound, and I really wanted to open up. So, okay, so you said that you help people deepen their connection to themselves, the awareness of who they truly are, opening themselves up to trusting in relationships, and awareness of how to deepen in partnership through doing exactly that. So, can we talk about trust in relationships? Because it's a huge issue, isn't it? And I know it's got a lot to do with, well, I presume, vulnerability and the heart. So, what have you got to say to men that are struggling to open up in trust in relationships?
Let me think about how to best respond to that. Because the tricky thing is that this question is best answered through experience. I find that there's a transitionary period, and the men who I work with in my coaching who really are willing to go there, they get the answer that you're asking. because they go through the experience, because I guide them there. Because the tricky thing is, and I'm going to answer your question the best I can, but it really isn't, it's not that simple, to be honest with you. When you, as a man, have been taught to sever yourself from emotions, what happens is there's an unconscious psychological response that occurs when emotions are presented. It's perceived outside of your awareness as an enormous threat, which is why men tend to flip into anger so fast. Threat. So what that does is that when you get into that space, it blinds you from being able to see beyond that fear, beyond that anger. It's like, basically you go red in a sense. And it varies from one man to the next, but I've seen this in many, many men. So trust, when I take men that I'm working with deeper into themselves, they begin to uncover certain realities that I find that they're either willing to trust me and be carried deeper into the recognition of who they are, until they get to the point where they reach that spot, and it's a spot. It's a spot where they didn't realize they weren't trusting themselves, but they couldn't put language to it. They might not even be able to put language to it after they go through this experience, and they might to a degree, but they get to that spot and they have to let themselves fall apart. They have to, because falling apart it's really a two-part process. It's letting go of the identity that you are not masculine for being vulnerable, for being exposed, for being weak at your very, very most vulnerable, weakest point in the presence of another man who's guiding you into that spot. So you get into that spot, and if you're trusting the process, I take you through it, and I'm with you on the other side. That's the experience. Now, in reality, this is where it gets tricky. And so you say, well, how can a man better trust? If a man had other men he could learn that he could trust, he would have that experience. So I would say, develop really healthy relationships with other men who are a reflection back to you without being judgmental, without being critical, while still exposing their own emotions vulnerably in a way that allows you to build your relationship. Have those men around. But again, it's tricky because even those men are still uncovering themselves. They're still learning what trust is themselves, and they're still learning how to be the trusting person. So men need other men to be the reflection back to themselves, to see how they're showing up. That's critical to becoming a man. You don't recognize what being a man is through a woman. You recognize what being a woman is through women. So you can, and that's fine, you can learn aspects of yourself, your own feminine nature, as you want to call it, your own soft, tender nature or expressive nature, if that's what you're experiencing through a woman. But the reflection of men is critical. And that's one of the reasons it's such a valuable thing for men to experience as they're going through the work that I take them through. So
yeah, no, that's profound. Men learn how to be a man through other men and not through women. And this is part of why this series evolved too, because, with the best of intentions, sometimes in frustration, us women were trying to, express how we wanted men to be, but they don't want to hear it from other women, in my experience. So this is why, I bring men on to talk to other men. And exactly as you said, but you articulated that in a way I thought, boom, yeah, that's exactly how it is, to come from a man. Thank you. And I want to clarify the issue of trust. So if someone is having trust issues, are they having it with both men and women, not just maybe women? It's people in general.
My experience, both within myself and professionally speaking, is that trust is something you either are skilled at giving or you're not. It's not, am I giving it to a man? Am I giving it to a woman? Because what you'll find is that, let's say, for example, I'm a man who hesitates to trust. And I fall in love with this woman, and I suddenly begin to unfold and open up to this woman, and I find myself trusting her suddenly in ways that I don't trust other women, right? Now, I'm trusting this woman and I've opened up, but there's some sort of, basically I've got some hormones happening and I'm falling in love and all this sort of stuff, and that's allowing me to open up to her more. But that doesn't mean that the part of me that doesn't trust is gone. It just means now my falling in love is creating a different experience for me. That's it. Once that period of time of falling in love, just an example here, begins to fade and the reality begins to set in because those chemicals are no longer working as strongly on you over a period of time, now the reality begins to set in that I am actually not as trusting as I thought I was. Oh, I was. Why am I not as trusting anymore, right? Well, you didn't learn how to be trusting, period. You simply fell in love, which is not trusting itself. It's a lot of things. It's beautiful, it's complicated, it's many things, but it doesn't cause us to be more trusting in and of itself, if we're not trusting to begin with. So for me personally, I began to look at my trust as, how can I show up as simply being trusting and trustable despite who I'm with? Because if I can show up with that anywhere, well, that's just what I'm embodying, not what I'm trying to give to one gender or another, or one person or another. I'm just simply being trusting and trustable, period.
Yeah, so good. Is it a matter of people who are trustworthy? If you got trust in yourself, if you know you're a decent person, you can trust others easier. Is it people who maybe aren't as emotionally healed and maybe are not so reliable or responsible for their actions that have problems trusting another because it's within themselves?
So again, great question. This is a really fascinating one, and let me see. I've got a quote that I believe is very relevant. It's actually pulled from the Tao Te Ching that I've carried with me, and I recently pulled this up again. Okay, so the Tao Te Ching, and here's a translation. All right, so I'm going to start with this and kind of respond from there. If we don't trust people, I'm sorry, wait. If we don't trust people, we make them untrustworthy. It's kind of as you first listen to it, if you really trying to make it make sense, it doesn't, but it absolutely does. So this is the trick to being to being trustable, to being trusting. If we give trust, period, then we find that the people around us reciprocate. So the questions of who's trustable begin to just fade away, right? The guarded pieces of ourselves, when we are being the embodiment of trust, people experience that and they reflect that back to us. Oh, this guy's trusting. I'm going to show up as trustable. And they don't think about it. It happens, right? Oh, that's the guy that I can trust. He's so trustworthy, and he's got that reputation and everybody knows it. So I want to be around him. And suddenly while I'm around him, I'm becoming more trustable, right? So, I see trust as, I think I'm getting, I don't know if I'm kind of lost myself a little bit on this, but I'm gonna have you kind of redirect me back to the initial question. But I see trust as, and I've come to learn this because I've watched people. I've actually asked myself in a variety of different questions, where do people lose trust? And for me, I would say that there were tons of times that I lost trust in other people in my childhood where, you know, my own father was absent when I had an older brother who was just a pain in the ass and mean, and I didn't have anybody to protect me. I lost trust there. When I was with my mom and I wanted her to go to see me in wrestling and I wanted her to see me compete as a wrestler, and I invited her and she didn't care enough to try and put effort into it, I felt I lost trust. When I you know, all these different situations, as a child, I felt like I lost a lot of trust. And so I used to think that it had something to do with trauma or childhood experience. But then I've heard different people who had relatively healthy childhoods that grew up to date somebody in their mid-20s or even 30s or something like that. And prior to this experience that they had with this particular person, they hadn't had any real traumas. Now, suddenly, they're becoming distrusting because this one individual has broken their trust so many times without that individual's awareness of how they've done it, or just their carelessness. So that lack of trust begins to set in at that point, right? So I think it really has to do with your experience in life and what points at which you were really in a vulnerable place and you were dependent on somebody, or you were just exposed and you didn't know how powerful their influence was over you, and so you started to close more and more, and you didn't know you were closing, and suddenly you become this person that isn't who you remember yourself to be.
Yeah, I get that. And it's such a broad subject, but you know, the sort of the dynamic, like I always go in trusting everyone until they give me a reason not to. But there's a lot of people that don't trust, waiting for people to earn their trust. So, you know, what's the healthy approach to that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. um, and I'm not, my my answer to this is probably going to be a little bit more boring than I'd like it to be, or maybe even the listeners would like it to be. But the reality is that if you are hesitant to trust, what you need to do is begin to learn how to move beyond your own fears of simply being trusting and simply being vulnerable and simply being exposed. Work through those fears, because if you don't, this is a guarantee, it's not a question. If you do not, what's going to happen is you're going to walk into the new relationship that you want to have, whatever relationships, it doesn't matter where they are, especially your most intimate relationship, and you are going to destroy that relationship because you're going to depend on that other person to constantly be the source of trustability rather than you becoming the person who simply trusts. That's going to destroy your relationship. Learn how to release your fears permanently. Learn how to let go of the parts of you that don't want to trust, so that you can step into relationships and create trust.
So good. Great answer. Thank you, Joe. Something else you said I really want to pick up on was when you said that a lot of men, and I know women too, but we're talking to men, when they perceive, for example, women asking them deeper questions, they see it as a threat and they respond immediately, react immediately with anger as default. What do you say to men who recognize that pattern in themselves?
Lean into it. um I don't know if it's clear what I mean by that, but let me just kind of like add a little elaboration to it. Lean into it. A man's tendency is to recognize the pattern and to say, oh, well, that's just who I am. That's just how I am. That's how my dad was, or, just part of life. Leaning into it would look like this. I see a pattern. I'm going to be the man that stops that pattern. I see a pattern that I've carried on, that I see other men carry on, that my dad did. I'm not going to be the man that carries that on. That's leaning into it. Because that means now you're going to sit with the discomfort of feeling what's beneath the surface of your anger. You're going to sit with the discomfort of your own woman's hurt and pain at your angry response to her. And you're going to learn how to work through it within yourself so that you show up more fully present. Lean into it.
So good, Joe. Thank you for that. Okay, so something else that you said to me, which I thought was really worth expanding into, you said oftentimes men don't really understand themselves. They don't know a lot about their own emotions, connecting with other people. What is a healthy emotional and psychological connection with other people, be that their family, friends, men friends, or their partners? So can we break this down, please, and look at those 4 different types of relationships, and what is a healthy emotional and psychological connection, and anything else you want to bring in around men and emotions?
Healthy emotional, psychological connection relative to the different relationship types. I'd say I like to simplify things as much as possible, right? And in simplifying things, I don't want to put too many people or people experiences with relationships into too many categories, because then I've got to show up this way with this person, and that's that sort of love, and this one's that. No, wait, that's crossing that boundary of love. I can't give that. Let's simplify things and understand that love is universal. And so if I'm being loving, I'm being loving in the same way to everybody. But that doesn't mean, but what is also happening there is that I'm understanding that the intimacy that I'm giving, the most intimate parts of myself, I'm being deliberate and intentional about giving to this one person. Or I mean, if you're polyamorous, these people. But the idea is, this is where my most intimate way of connecting and relating occurs, period. Outside of that, I'm offering myself to the same degree of presence and connection with these other people. Now, I would say it categorizes, like, think about it like this, because let's say you've got your family nucleus, which is the people that you've been raised with, mom, dad, siblings, aunts, uncles. You got that. You've got your intimate partner, or whatever your intimate relationship choice is there. And you've got coworkers, and you got guy friends, right? Let's say we're categorizing it like that. Sure, you want to be able to show up in a pretty consistent and available way with all of them. And yes, you're only going to be sharing with certain people, but if you have a family history that says, well, your family can't really fully be trustable, well, then really what it comes down to is that when you've recognized that there's a consistent pattern your family has, and you can't share certain aspects of yourself as freely, but that doesn't mean less trusting. That simply means I'm not divulging certain information to these people because they're not able to control their mouths, essentially. It's not a lack of trust as much as it is, I recognize this is what these people can handle, so this is what I'm going to give them. So when I look at those different relationship types, I'm not giving myself any less to any of them. I am just I'm monitoring how much I expose myself to them, like vulnerably, or just in terms of awareness of very personal details. Like, and I hope this makes sense, because there's a big difference between hiding and not divulging. Right? Hiding is, oh, I'm afraid, I can't tell them anything, and I'm going to keep this to myself, and I'm closing off. Not divulging is like, I'm not afraid, but I just know they can't handle this information. They're just not. They just don't know how to deal with it. So that's how I see it. As far as connecting with people and developing healthy relationships, because your family's not always going to be the best place for you to be able to trust. And they say, I've heard it said, and this is slightly accurate, not so much, but decent way to look at it. The 5 people you spend the most time with in your life are the people who you become, right? So it's not necessarily about family, brother, coworker, partner. It's about who I spend my time with, who these people who are influencing me, who I'm allowing myself to be influenced by, and who I'm influencing. Who's your circle of people who you are choosing to be closest with, because those are the people who you're becoming, and those are the people who you are influencing to become who they are. Are you surrounding yourself with those people who are taking you to the place that you want to be with yourself? That's how I personally see it. I think breaking it down into how I show up in each relationship, it can get too complicated. So I'm just like, I'm going to show up fully with everybody else. I've got my intimate partner, and that's the special place. She gets a different part of me. That's it. And outside of that, I just monitor how much I can give to other people, and who's really showing up in full integrity that I can keep by my side.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Joe. So, what do you think in the collective, the masculine collective, is the biggest struggle at the moment? What are men dealing with the most?
I think a lot of men are suffering with sort of an identification of how to have what was once really easy to have. Uh, Basically, I'd say roughly about 20 years ago, life was more of an Eminem style world, Marshall Mathers. It was just like you joke and you make multi-million-dollar hits off of beating up women, right? And people are like, this is a great tune, Today, it's like women are kind of given a bit of pushback on that. And people, the cultures and the generations are softening into more of a reactive to a lack of consideration and a lack of empathy, right? And so we've got the LGBTQs and such expanding and growing and becoming more public. And when you have all that, there's a requirement for us to adjust. And men 20 years ago were just like, why the fuck do I have to adjust? They're pussies. Let them get over it, right? And that's how we dealt with it. And everybody accepted that as a reality. But we're nudging more and more into a global culture of, we have to learn how to sensitize ourselves. And because where we came from was, fuck them, they're pussies, let them grow up, because we came from that, we have to go through a lot of masculine upheaval, on the male side of things, to be like, what the crap's going on here? Everything used to be fine, Joe Rogan's like just on the, who Joe Rogan is, right?
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard
So Joe,
a lot about him, but yeah.
well, he's so UFC, and he tends to be right. He walks the line of going really, like, he straddles the line of going overboard and staying within the boundaries. He's kind of like, he's just at that edge where he pushes a lot of people's buttons, and yet a lot of people are like, yeah, thank God he's speaking up about this. And so Joe Rogan, I think, is a really good example in the sense that he understands and he still pushes that edge. But I think that even Joe Rogan, well, probably especially Joe Rogan, and others similar to him have similar attitude, they could still learn to soften and sensitize themselves, right? That doesn't mean being overly feminine, doesn't mean it at all. It means becoming more aware. It means becoming more conscientious. It means becoming more considerate. It means becoming more empathetic and understanding to what isn't you, or isn't your experience, isn't your preference, right? So men are going through stages of trying to understand what this new thing is, because being men, and I love this, I heard something from a book that I read, men are the biggest, women's biggest experiment. So men often do what they do because of love, because of attraction, because they want to impress a woman. You take all of the, like they've got this mountain of money and success, and it began from the spark of wanting to be able to have every woman that he wanted, right? And that's the unconscious motivator. Sure, he's got this one woman by his side, but sure, he also, like Jeff Bezos, wants to create a rocket that looks like a dick, So you have this part of you, this masculine part of you, that's just driven to just say, I want to have as much money and publicity and exposure that says I am a masculine man. But while you're doing that, well, how do I really hear the part of pushback on the world that says, hey, we're here. Hey, are you listening? Hey, you're being an asshole. Hey, like, hey, can you chill out and, be a little bit more aware of the fact that if you continue on the way you do, you're doing more damage to the collective than you are good. You're only focused on yourself the way you're doing it right now. So we're growing into this awareness of what it means to be simultaneously sensitive and assertive, simultaneously consciously aware, and yet not letting go of our balls, and it's a duality, and it's like you don't let go of one over the other, but you also don't stay stuck in the past where it's okay to just be careless about your words and actions and behaviors and anger.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, Joe, because as you're speaking, and I've seen somewhere that in reality, the LGBTQ community is less than maybe 1% of the whole population. I mean, definitely less than 5. But the impact and the footprint and the awareness around it is huge. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum. We're trying to rise healthy masculinity, and that's literally getting no, and apart from in the conscious and relationships community, not getting any awareness out in the mainstream media. It's this struggle, isn't it? Like, how do you maintain your healthy sense of masculinity without having to pander to maybe less than 1% of the population?
Yeah, you want me to respond to that? Was that
If you want to, it's just an open-ended sort of discussion topic, but have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit complicated. I don't. I think that it's really important for us to, again, be understanding, be empathetic, and adjust. But I don't know. It's honestly it's a topic that I think is a little bit more complex than this conversation really we can go into in this conversation. I'll just kind of leave it on this. I think when you really genuinely hear what a group of people have to say, like really, really, really genuinely hear them, like you're not just listening to them being frustrated and pushing their agenda out more into the world. You are listening to the core of what they're expressing, because you're looking at the flags, and you're looking at the events, and you're looking at the changing of the policies, and you're going like, Jesus, well, it's only 1%. I don't mean you personally. I'm just saying, I'm thinking of like some people, but like, Jesus, it's only 1%. Like, can't we just get them to shut up? Why do our policies have to change for all of them and all this? But here's, just like anybody else in this world, if you are really listening to the core of who they are, why are they doing that? What is it about them that motivates them to get this word out there? Are you listening to that? Because screw the policies, screw the flags, screw everything else. If you are listening to them, you resolve the problem. Gone. But are you listening?
Good points. Thank you. So, Jo, we've got about half an hour left. From your experience personally, professionally, what else needs to be brought into this conversation around men, masculinity, the healing journey?
There are a lot of men. Here's a particular challenging topic. There are a lot of men doing men's work. I could name a ton of people who are really doing a lot of work to raise awareness of how to live in a more healthy and embodied, healthy masculine place. How to connect with your emotions, how to, work with your shadow, as a lot of men I see like to say. And there's absolutely, I see that effort and that push from so many different men to be a really great thing, because it nudges out bit by bit awareness. It nudges out a more conscious presence from men, from the collective of men, from individual men. And yet the one thing that I find missing the most is, even from that, is men who are willing to go above and beyond to really become the embodiment of presence, in the sense that they are choosing to be committed to embodying all of the qualities that we need more of, which is very different than doing men's work. So men's work, we're looking at an identity. We're looking at, well, this is what men's work is, right? Oh, well, have you heard of so-and-so? He does great men's work. Or have you heard of Mankind Project? They do great men's work. Or have you heard of such and such? All of those are great. All of them are doing great things, and I hear wonderful things. At the end of the day, are these men utilizing those sources, those resources, those places which they get to discover themselves as a mode of identifying with what masculinity is, or are they uncovering within themselves the qualities that are the embodiment that we need more of? I'd say that's more valuable than simply pursuing every single different aspect of available men's work out there. And really what that looks like is being so committed to being that presence, to being that example, to being that model to the people around you, that you are deliberately shedding all the parts of you that you recognize are causing dysfunction in this world, in your relationships, that you just need to let go of, so you can show up more fully for the world around you. That's what I would love to have be more of a conversation in this world.
Okay, let's have that conversation. So I'm trying to understand your definition of men's work as opposed to what would you call the other aspect that you were talking of now that went even deeper in embodiment? How would you, what terminology would you use around that to differentiate it from men's work, just for conversational purposes?
Let me think about this for a second. So let me back up a second. What do you, so I have context, what do you know about men's work?
Well, my understanding of men's work was, to work through anything that was stopping the embodiment of healthy masculinity. So ultimately, embodying healthy masculinity. That's how I've understood it. So now I'm just trying to differentiate that in your understanding so we can open this conversation up. Because if I understood correctly, what you were saying about men's work was different from the embodiment of healthy masculinity.
Yeah, so here's, okay. All right, cool. That yes, answers my question. This is where it gets tricky, because it's less about being a man, more about just our human nature. So it's less about being a man, less about being masculine, more about catching ourselves in being human. So we have this tendency to desire to see ourselves in a sort of symbolic way, right? This is the type of man I am. These are the things I do. This is what I identify with. And so when we get involved in something that piques our curiosity, we like to culturally define ourselves in that way. So this is the culture that I identify with. I think about it like it's kind of not the best example, but a good example here. Gang members identify with specific gangs, right? That's the place that they go to connect with people who are similar to them. That's where they go to say, well, I'm like this person, I'm not like that gang over there, because, whatever, they're our enemy, they do this and we don't do this, right? It's kind of the bad side of things, but the same thing occurs in any sort of culture environment, right? So the more I allow myself to identify with that culture, the more I distance myself from being connected to awareness of who I really am, independent of that culture. So what happens a lot, and I want to be clear, like, there's nothing wrong with connecting with these groups that are in many ways really teaching you about yourself and really substantially more healthy than most of what you would experience elsewhere. It's great. It's just, we have this tendency as humans to get so caught up in identity with that one thing that we then have a blindness to the aspects of ourselves we still need to work on yet. Which is why I discover on a regular basis things I hear about from people doing men's work that are actually really dysfunctional. I hear all the time, well, at least I haven't in a while because I haven't had conversations with people involved in it, but Mankind Project, if you know about Mankind Project, I've heard of an abundance of leaders and met leaders who are really carrying a lot of dysfunction into the organization as a result of their blindnesses. But this is the nature of when we become to identify with the group. What we do is we follow what the group does, and therefore we are now this I'm this leader and I have earned this level, and so these people see me as this, and now because I am that, that's it, period. There's nothing more for me to look at. I'm just saying that if you are truly becoming an embodiment of what is healthy, you're going to be able to connect with those organizations. You're going to learn from them. You're going to invest yourself in them, and genuinely. And then you're also going to be able to develop and evolve yourself independently of those things, so that you're not going to be blinded by the cultural tendency that we have as humans.
Okay, yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, I think it's a tricky topic, isn't it? Because there's so many levels of men's work. It's such a broad subject, from the mankind, massive sort of projects, worldwide projects, to, individual coaches that are doing their own sort of weekend retreats, or, online groups. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? We can't speak. I don't think we can speak for everyone. It's something that each man needs to feel into. But I do understand what you're saying. If I get it, that it's easy to get into the identity at the cost of individualization. Is that what you're saying? And to actually, no?
Well, no, I mean, it. I'm using language to describe an experience based on the topic that we're on right now. It's, but I mean, as you're saying that, I kind of want to add to it, and I'm searching for what that extra thing is. Let's say here, I don't. Let's say that we're considering masculinity and men's work as an aspect of who we need to be as men. I've learned that, when about 5 years ago, maybe about 6 years ago, when I really started to explore the what a lot of people like to refer to as the divine masculine, divine feminine, right? The masculine and feminine energies, and I dove deep into them about 6 years ago. And what I began to discover along the way is that there was a lot of there was an unconscious emphasis on men needing to become more healthy masculine. And so I explored that. I was like, yeah, that's so right. And I need to, and so I started to look into what that meant, and I started to learn how to be that. And the more I dug into it, the more I just saw that it wasn't a question of how much more masculine I could be. It was more a question of how I could be a healthy balance of masculine and feminine within myself, how I could be a healthy balance of connected to my emotions and fully present and structured, right? So when I think about men's work, I think that it has a tendency to be focused on substantially more masculine qualities and traits. That's not a balanced way of living. So I see it as, can I discover myself independent of those things that will tend to be more masculine emphasized, because I need to be a whole person.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Thank you for the clarity. Let's look at, within men, healthy masculine and feminine aspects. So, in the embodiment of an authentically balanced man, and we know that varies for each man, what are some, let's just label some healthy masculine traits and healthy feminine traits?
Hmm. So give me context, because In my mind, when you say healthy, I think I immediately go to, well, healthy is subjective.
Okay. All right. So, all right. Well, let's look at you. What would you say are your highest that you've embodied as a man? What are your highest masculine traits and what are your highest feminine traits that you see as the healthy version of you?
Okay. So I would say that masculine things that I am proud to embody are things like integrity, consistency, trustability. Um, I hear the word structure really kind of gets thrown around, but what that really essentially means to me is somebody that is disciplined. Um, and disciplined in all aspects of life, right? So that's around how I invest myself in my career. That's how I have control over my own sex and sexual desire. It's over how I engage with people. It's over how I give myself to my relationships. So how disciplined am I over those things? And that would also include how I live my day from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, that allows me to keep that sustained, right? So I see that as masculine, what you call masculine. On the feminine side, I would say what I don't resist becoming whatever I need to be in this moment. Which means maybe that requires me to tap into a part of myself that is expressive emotionally. Maybe that's a part of me that needs to be able to move. And I mean, move. And I actually have in the morning, one of the things that I do as a routine is I actually pop on a song that for roughly about 3 to 5 minutes, and I just dance, right? So I've got a meditation practice, a breath practice, and I've got a moment of dance. Why? Because I'm my body needs to move. Like it's just the nature of being human. We've got muscles, we've got ligaments, it's got to move, right? And if I get too stagnant in one place and I don't allow myself to move into emotional experience and body movement, well, I become rigid, both physically, like my body will actually develop pattern stickiness, like within the muscle, within the fascia, restrictions and such, that will also be reflected in my personality, because when you have tension in your body, it's reflected in how you show up. So are you allowing yourself to move freely? Are you allowing yourself, and I'm kind of speaking to myself here, am I allowing myself to express emotion, whatever that emotion needs to be, in a way that's simply an expression and not an imposition on other people? If I'm feeling anger, can I feel that anger while still being connected to you and let you experience that? I want you to experience love through me, care, because I'm pissed off, but do you feel that I actually care about you despite the fact that I'm angry, right? So that's a part of me that is allowing myself to feel emotion, to express emotion, without taking it out on anybody. So yeah, and by being in the moment, I think that that's also what I would consider a feminine thing. That's if I structure my day too much, if I'm too disciplined, if I'm all of those things, well, then in the moments where my woman needs me to be present to whatever emotional spontaneous thing that she wants to do in this moment, she smacks me on the ass to wake me up and says, hey, we should go to the we should go skydiving today. And I'm like, what, babe? I got some stuff to do here. I got to finish up for the rest of the day. And in fact, I've got a week's worth of work that I got to, you know what? Am I slowing down to be like, you know what? Did I take a break? Am I really truly present with this woman? Am I willing to sacrifice this part of me that needs to be so structured, so disciplined? Am I letting go into that? Right. So that's a momentary thing. Connection to the emotions, allowing myself movement, allowing myself the spontaneity and the joy of the moment, whatever that looks like.
Thank you. Awesome. Where does the heart come into it, Joe?
Where does the heart come into it?
Yeah, as a man, what are your thoughts around the heart?
Can you elaborate?
Well,
Because
what does connecting with your heart mean for you? How do you do it? How important is it?
So I see connecting with the heart, connecting or as kind of, how am I letting you feel and experience me? Because as I'm even on this call right now, what I'm not doing is I'm not withholding aspects of myself. As I'm watching you, I'm observing your facial expressions, your body language, because what that tells me is, am I showing up fully with you, right? Do you get to experience all of me? I see that as heart, as you experiencing my heart, connecting at the heart. And if I can let you feel and experience all the ways that I don't resist being myself, then I get to fill your heart up, right?
Yeah. So good. Great explanation. Awesome. So, Joe, we'll start wrapping up now. So, two things left. If you could let people know where they can find you, please. And after that, I'll ask you to deliver a final message to men.
So the best place to reach me would be on Facebook, but I'll mention this. Facebook.com/Joseph, Keich, all one word, Joseph Keich. But I also, that's probably the best way to connect with me. I do have a website, joekeich.com. It's limited interaction there. And then my email, joekeich coaching@gmail.com, if you wanted to reach out to me there. But email and Facebook, best places to reach me. Also got a Facebook group Conscious Love. What was you said there were, I think there were three things you said. How do people connect with me? And I know you said what would I want to leave them with, but wasn't there something else?
No, that's it. I'll drop all those. If you could message me those links, I'll put them all in the description below. Well, I got most of them except the email. I'll drop those, make it easy for people to find you. I'll put them in the description below. Yeah, no, if we could wrap up with a final message to men, what do you say to men that are maybe having a bit of a tough time at the moment, to shine a bit of light on their path?
And see how I can best put this. Say you're not alone in your suffering and your heartache, and the part of you that believes that feeling and experiencing emotion, challenge, struggle as a man, we have a tendency to perceive that we're isolated, and so we're stuck doing things ourselves. We're loners, and so we do things on our own, and we figure it out on our own. You're not alone. You're not isolated. You might think and feel that you are, no matter what your struggle is. But if you're willing to, you just allow yourself to feel and experience all those things and explore what that even means, so you can discover yourself yourself beyond that isolation, beyond that fear, beyond your struggle. Because once you feel through all of that, you'll really begin to discover that there's something much bigger than you out there, and you'll connect better with that.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, beautiful message. Thank you so much, Joe. It's been an amazing insight into men and emotions and your journey. So I really want to thank you from my heart to yours. And yeah, thank you. You're our number 77 Heart Warrior. So that is also for me a very special number.
I'll take it. Yeah, my pleasure. I really, Gemma, I love all the questions that you brought. They were really, there was a lot of substance to that. You really put a lot of intention into those questions, and I think that brought out some really great conversation. So thanks for the invite.
Definitely. So thanks everyone for watching. If you could like, share, subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Heart Warriors. If you could stay on, please, Joe, we'll get a title. So thanks. Bye, everyone.